Late one autumn morning in 2011, officers following a trail of disturbed graves opened a cramped apartment and found a scene that refused easy words. Life-size figures sat on sofas and shelves, dressed in skirts, stockings and tiny boots. Toys and picture books lay nearby. A music box ticked. At first glance, they looked like dolls gathered for a child's tea. Up close, they were not toys. Wax masks, padding to give limb shape, and the unmistakable contours of preserved human remains beneath fabric. The room smelled of books and desiccants, not the rot the mind expects. He had arranged them in domestic tableau, an impossible family. One household ritual became in an instant a public violation of mourning and law. This is the story of Anatoly Yurievich Moskvin, the mummy maker. But why was Anatoly keeping those dolls in his home? What possible motive could drive such an unusual obsession? To begin unraveling this disturbing mystery, we need to look back, not at the man he became, but at the child he once was. For it is in his early years that the first cracks began to show. Anatoly Moskvin was an only child born to parents, Yuri Fedorovich and Elvira Alexandrovna, in Gorky City in Soviet Russia on the 1st of September 1966. He was described as a quiet but intelligent boy, and he developed a morbid obsession with the dead and cemeteries. Moskvin graduated from Moscow State University in the 80s with degrees in philology and history. He had made a name for himself in academic circles and was often referred to as an eclectic genius. Not only could Moskvin speak 13 languages, but he also developed a strong interest in Celtic history and folklore. It is said he also developed an interest in the occult. The fascination with the dead, according to Moskvin, was ignited after an incident he endured as a young boy. As Moskvin walked home from school one afternoon in 1979, he said he was apprehended by a group of men wearing black suits. The men were dressed in black as they were part of a funeral for 11-year-old Natasha Petrova, who had been killed by accidental electrocution. It's said that he was forced by adults in the crowd to press his face to the girl's waxy forehead and kiss her. An image, he said, burned into him and bent how he related to the dead. He later described visions and dreams of dead girls and an attraction to occult and ritual practices he studied in folklore and ethnography. Those early experiences, the scholarly fascination with rites of the dead folded with a childhood humiliation and a developing inner life of visions, set the seam along which his adult practices would later run. He even went as far as to join a satanic cult and told the other members about his nightmares. However, Moskvin expressed his sadness that he cast Natasha away and made it his objective to learn about the dark arts that she spoke of. During the 1990s, Moskvin began researching ancient rituals that would allow him to speak with the dead. He found that many tales of ancient Celtic druids would lay upon the grave of a deceased person in order to hear the dead speak. So Moskvin would read through obituaries, particularly interested in the deaths of young children, and when he found one that he felt spoke to him, he would visit the grave and lay on top of it. In 2009, families of the deceased began to notice the graves of their loved ones had been tampered with. After a terrorist attack occurred at the Domodedovo airport in Moscow in 2011, investigators found ties to a particular cemetery. This is where they found Moskvin painting over images of deceased Muslims, but not damaging anything else. The police apprehended Moskvin and then went to search his apartment for further evidence, and what they found left them shocked beyond belief. The officers walked into the apartment and were met by the sight of several large dolls, wrapped in fine clothing and boots. and were even found to be wearing makeup. But they were not life-size dolls. They were the deceased mummified bodies of around 29 young girls. At the time of Mosfin's arrest, he was 45 years old and lived with both his parents, who assumed that Mosfin's doll collection was strange, but probably just a phase or an unusual hobby. Little did they know that under the facade of each doll was the mummified body of a deceased young girl. Upon his arrest, Mosfin worked with the police officers, explaining his every action and motivation. He told the investigators that he would choose his victims by reading their obituary, and if one called out to him, he would go to the gravesite and lay on the grave. He explained that sleeping on the grave would give the child spirit the chance to speak to him, to ask him to resurrect them, and that he only ever removed the bodies of those who asked him to. We saw these dolls, but we did not suspect there were dead bodies inside. We thought it was his hobby to make such big dolls and did not see anything wrong with it. Elvira, Anatoly Moskvin's mother. Once he had removed a body, Moskvin would either hide them in a mausoleum, where he could prepare them for mummification, or transport the body back to his apartment. Moskvin told the police that he hoped to remove the bodies and take them back to a warm, comfortable environment, such as his home, which would make their spirits feel more comfortable, so they would be more willing to speak to him. Plus, it would be easier for him to hear them when they were not underground. The process in which Moskvin worked to keep the dolls at his home began at either a secret location local to his apartment or in his apartment. It is at these places where he would begin the mummification process using a combination of salt and baking soda. From 2005 to 2011, he walked the countryside, documenting stones and compiling cemetery maps. He later told reporters he sometimes slept near graves and spent nights in coffins to understand burial customs, statements that blurred ethnography and eccentricity. Press accounts described the recovered remains as mainly girls and young women, many so young they should have still been in school. One particular body was identified as 10-year-old Olga Chardimova. Olga was abducted by a drug addict with the intention to steal her earrings and other belongings. But when Olga tried to escape, the addict hit her over the head with a metal pole. Her body was not found for nearly 5 months. In 2012, as the investigation into Moskvin continued, they exhumed the little girl's grave and found a hole in the top of the coffin. When the police raided his home and found several notes detailing his actions, they found one note detailing how he stole Olga's body in 2003 by digging down into the grave, creating a hole in the top of the coffin to exhume her body. Olga's mother, Natalia, would visit her daughter's grave daily and was even in the process of painting a fence around the grave. As she would arrive to visit her child, she would find stuffed animals left as gifts, as well as notes signed by DA, meaning Dobry Angel or Kind Angel, as this is how Moskvin viewed himself. The notes would contain things such as congratulating her on public holidays, and even keeping track of what school year she would be in. He would also leave decorations on her grave for New Year, and referred to her in his notes as Little Lady. This torment of Olga's family members lasted for almost 9 years. Natalia buried her daughter for a second time in an unmarked grave to ensure she would be left to rest in peace. Moskvin was charged with the desecration of graves and dead bodies under Article 244 of the Criminal Code. During the trial, he was given a psychiatric evaluation, and it was determined that he suffered from schizophrenia and would not be fit to stand trial. He was sentenced to serve his time in a psychiatric ward. In an interview after his arrest, Moskvin stated he felt great sympathy for the dead children and thought that they could be brought back to life by either science or black magic. As an expert on Celtic culture, Moskvin learned that the ancient druids slept on graves in order to communicate with spirits of their dead. In 2018, Moskvin, now in his 50s, was almost released to his psychiatric work from his home, as psychiatrists believed he was improving. This motion was denied. It was also claimed that Moskvin warned parents not to rebury their children, as he would dig them up again once he was released. Since Moskvin's arrest, many of his colleagues have cut ties with him, and his parents live in isolation due to the torrent of abuse they faced when their son's antics came to light. It is even documented that Elvira, Moskvin's mother, wanted her and her husband to commit suicide, but her husband refused. He catalogued the dead as a scholar and kept some as impossible children at home. A life that forces us to hold two truths at once: that medicine can explain, and that explanation does not undo harm.